It all started with a scream. Not the kind of scream you hear in horror movies, but the kind that jolts you awake at 6 a.m. On a Saturday morning, I sat up in bed, my heart pounding, and rubbed my eyes, wondering if I had imagined it. But then it came in a high-pitched, gut-wrenching shriek that sent a chill down my spine. I grabbed my phone and stumbled to the window, still half asleep. What I saw made my blood run cold. My beautiful, modern, gray house had been transformed overnight. The entire exterior was now a blinding shade of neon pink. Not just any pink, mind you. This was the kind of pink that belonged on a child's toy, not a suburban home. It was obnoxious, garish, and, worst of all, permanent. For a few seconds, I just stood there, staring in disbelief. My house had been vandalized. But why? And more importantly, by whom? As my mind scrambled for answers, my eyes landed on a familiar figure standing smugly on my driveway. Margaret Hargrove, the self-proclaimed Queen of Maplewood Heights. She was dressed in her usual khaki pants and oversized sunglasses, arms crossed as she watched the chaos unfold. Next to her stood two painters, their tools still in hand, looking incredibly awkward. My stomach twisted in anger. I stormed down the stairs, flung open my front door, and marched straight up to her. "Margaret, what the hell is this?" I demanded, gesturing wildly at my now radioactive-looking house. She turned to me with a sweet but utterly fake smile. "Oh, good morning. Do you like it? We decided your house needed a little enhancement." I blinked, barely able to contain my growing fury. "Who is we? And what gives you the right to paint my house without my permission?" Margaret scoffed, as if my outrage was completely unjustified. "The HOA, of course. Your house was such an eyesore, all that dull gray. So depressing. We needed to bring some vibrancy to the neighborhood. And as acting HOA president, I have the authority to enforce aesthetic improvements." I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. "Margaret, this is vandalism. You can't just show up and paint my house whatever color you want." She raised an eyebrow, clearly enjoying herself. "Oh, but I can. You see, it's in the bylaws section 4, clause 7. The HOA reserves the right to ensure all homes maintain the community's approved aesthetic. And I, as the acting president, made the executive decision that pink is the new standard." My jaw tightened. This was absolute nonsense. "Margaret, that rule doesn't give you the right to repaint someone's house without their consent." She waved a dismissive hand. "Well, it's done now. You should be grateful, really. This will increase your property value. Everyone loves a pop of color." I turned to the painters, who looked like they wanted to be anywhere but here. "Did she pay you for this?" I asked, barely containing my rage. One of them hesitated before nodding. "Yeah. She said it was an official HOA project. We just followed instructions." Margaret clapped her hands together. "And they did a wonderful job, don't you think? The whole street looks so much livelier now." I glanced around, noticing that the neighbors had gathered on their lawns, whispering and shaking their heads. Some looked horrified, others amused, but no one seemed to be supporting Margaret's decision. That should have given me some satisfaction, but it didn't. My house was still pink, and Margaret was standing there, acting like she had just done me the biggest favor of my life. Taking a deep breath, I forced myself to calm down. Losing my temper wouldn't help. "Margaret, you're going to pay to have this repainted," I said, my voice steady but firm. "I never approved this, and I want my house back to how it was." She let out a laugh. "Oh, that's not happening. The new color is part of the HOA's initiative. If you want to repaint, you'll have to submit a request, pay a fine for violating community standards, and then wait for HOA board approval. But I wouldn't hold your breath, because I'm not approving any changes." My blood boiled, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me explode. Instead, I gave her a tight-lipped smile. "We'll see about that." Margaret's smirk faltered for a brief second, but she quickly regained her composure. "Oh, I know we will. Anyway, I have a meeting to attend. Enjoy your new look." With that, she spun on her heel and sauntered away, leaving me standing in my driveway, fists clenched, surrounded by gawking neighbors. It wasn't just the fact that my house was pink. It was the audacity, the absolute power trip Margaret was on, thinking she could do whatever she wanted without consequence. But she had no idea who she was messing with. As I looked around at the horrified expressions on my neighbors' faces, an idea began to form. Margaret thought she ran this neighborhood. She thought she had the final say on everything. But what she didn't know was that I had a little secret of my own. Years ago, the original HOA president had moved away, and out of convenience, I had quietly bought up the majority of the association shares. The only reason Margaret had been running things was because I had let her. She was a loud, annoying presence, but I never cared enough to intervene until now. Now, she had made it personal. As I stared at my nightmare of a house, I made a silent vow. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Margaret thought she had won, but she was about to learn the hard way that she had just painted a target on her own back. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found the one I needed. It was time to call an emergency HOA meeting, one that Margaret wouldn't see coming. I turned to my neighbors, who were still whispering among themselves. "Everyone," I said loudly, getting their attention. "Be at the clubhouse tonight. Trust me, you're going to want to hear what I have to say." A few exchanged curious glances, but most nodded. They had been under Margaret's rule for far too long. If there was a chance to change things, they would take it. As I walked back inside, I took one last look at my house. It was hideous. It was humiliating. But it was also the beginning of Margaret's downfall. She had made a mistake, and I was about to make sure she regretted it. I spent the rest of the day staring at my pink house, trying to process just how far Margaret had gone this time. It wasn't enough for her to enforce ridiculous rules about mailbox sizes and lawn decorations. No, she had actually taken it upon herself to paint my house, as if she had any real authority over me. And the worst part was, she thought she had won. She thought she could get away with it just because she wore an imaginary crown as the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood. But she had no idea that she had just set herself up for the biggest embarrassment of her life. As I paced through my levying room, my phone buzzed with texts from neighbors, all of them asking if I was really planning to do something about Margaret's antics. Some of them were cautious, hesitant to get on her bad side, but others were downright eager to see her taken down a notch. I smirked as I typed out a response, confirming that there would be an important HOA meeting tonight. That was all they needed to hear. Words spread like wildfire, and by the time evening rolled around, I knew the clubhouse would be packed. I arrived early, stepping inside the meeting hall that Margaret had practically claimed as her throne room. Rows of chairs were set up, facing a small stage where she usually stood, barking out her latest rules and fines. But tonight, things were going to be different. Tonight, she wasn't in control. I was. One by one, the neighbors arrived, some whispering excitedly, others looking hopeful but skeptical. The tension in the air was thick, as if everyone had been waiting for this moment but wasn't sure if it would actually happen. Then, just as expected, Margaret strutted in, wearing her usual air of superiority. She had her clipboard clutched tightly in her hands, her lips pursed as she scanned the crowd. She had clearly come prepared to shut down whatever I had planned. She barely spared me a glance as she marched toward the front of the room, tapping her clipboard with a manicured fingernail. "All right, everyone, let's get this over with. I assume we're here to discuss the recent aesthetic improvements." I took a step forward, meeting her smug gaze with an expression of pure amusement. "Oh, we're definitely here to talk about the pink house, Margaret. But we're also here to talk about something much bigger." Her eyes narrowed. "I don't have time for whatever nonsense you're about to say. If you're here to whine about the color, save it. The decision has been made, and it's final." I chuckled, shaking my head. "Actually, Margaret, I think you're the one who should be listening right now. Because what you don't know is that I own the HOA. The room fell into absolute silence. A few people exchanged confused glances, while others sat up straighter, clearly intrigued. Margaret, however, scoffed, rolling her eyes. "That's ridiculous. You don't own the HOA. I run the HOA." I pulled out a folder from my bag and placed it on the table in front of me. "You run it?" "No, Margaret. You've been acting like you run it. But I bought up the majority of the association shares years ago. You've just been enforcing rules without realizing that the real power has been mine all along." For the first time, Margaret's confidence wavered. She grabbed the folder, flipping through the pages with growing panic. Her eyes darted back to me, her face suddenly a shade paler. This can't be right." I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice just enough for dramatic effect. "Oh, it's very right. And now that I'm officially taking control, I've decided it's time for some rule changes." A murmur broke out across the room, a mixture of excitement and anticipation. Margaret was still frozen, gripping the papers like they might burst into flames in her hands. I stood up straighter and addressed the crowd. "First order of business. The new community-wide house color is now officially pink." Since Margaret was so enthusiastic about it, I think it's only fair that every single house matches mine. The reaction was immediate. Gasps, laughter, and even a few claps rippled through the room. Margaret's mouth fell open, her expression twisting into pure horror. You can't do that." I tilted my head. "Why not? You said it yourself, enforcing an approved community aesthetic is part of the HOA's power. I'm just following your lead." The laughter grew louder, and a few neighbors who had clearly suffered under Margaret's ridiculous rules looked downright gleeful. Margaret slammed her clipboard onto the table. "This is outrageous. I demand that we revoke your authority." I cut her off with a raised hand. "Oh, I'm not done yet. The second order of business. From now on, the HOA will hold a monthly community vote where homeowners get to decide what color your house will be repainted. Every month, a new shade chosen by the people." The room exploded into cheers. Some people were already shouting out color suggestions: lime green, electric blue, zebra stripes. Margaret looked like she might faint. Her voice came out in a near shriek. "You're making a mockery of the HOA." I grinned. "Oh, I'm just making sure everyone has an equal say. Isn't that what a good HOA should do?" She shook her head violently, her hands trembling. "This is harassment. You can't just turn my house into some kind of joke." I shrugged. "Didn't seem like a problem when you did it to mine." She turned to the crowd, desperation in her eyes. "You can't let him do this. This is madness." But the crowd wasn't on her side anymore. They were laughing, nodding, fully on board with my plan. Margaret had pushed people too far for too long, and now she was facing the consequences. I stepped forward one last time, my voice calm but firm. "Margaret, you've spent years making everyone's lives miserable with your power trips. You painted my house without permission, you fined people for the smallest infractions, and you've bullied this entire neighborhood into following rules that only benefit you. That ends today." She was shaking now, barely able to keep herself standing. For the first time, she had no control. I reached into my bag and pulled out one final document. "And lastly, effective immediately, HOA membership is now voluntary. No more forced fees, no more ridiculous fines, no more Margaret dictating everyone's lives." The cheers this time were deafening. Neighbors stood up, clapping, some even high-five-ing each other. Margaret looked around wildly, realizing that she had lost everything. I turned back to her. "You have two options. You can step down and let the neighborhood move on, or you can keep fighting and make this worse for yourself." For a moment, I thought she might explode. But then her shoulders slumped in defeat. She grabbed her clipboard, muttered something under her breath, and stormed out of the room. As soon as the door slammed behind her, the entire neighborhood erupted into celebration. I looked around at the faces of people who had just been freed from Margaret's tyranny and smiled. This was just the beginning. The meeting ended with an energy unlike anything the neighborhood had ever seen before. People were buzzing with excitement, laughing, and shaking their heads at the sheer absurdity of what had just happened. Margaret had spent years terrorizing them with ridiculous HOA rules, and in one night, everything had changed. It wasn't just about me getting back at her for painting my house pink. It was about everyone finally getting to breathe without worrying about arbitrary fines and pointless regulations. The atmosphere in the room was a mixture of disbelief and pure joy. But even as the celebration started, I knew this wasn't over. Margaret wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. As the neighbors gradually filed out, I caught snippets of conversations. Some were already discussing what colors they should vote on for Margaret's house. A few people were still in shock that I had been the real owner of the HOA all along. Others were simply relieved that they could finally decorate their own lawns without fear of getting a violation notice. It was satisfying to see the weight lifting off their shoulders, but I kept my guard up. Margaret might have stormed out tonight, but there was no way she was going down without a fight. The next morning, my prediction came true. I had barely finished my first cup of coffee when a loud knock echoed through my house. I took my time answering, already knowing who it was. Sure enough, when I opened the door, Margaret stood there, looking far less composed than usual. Her perfectly styled bob was slightly disheveled, and she had dark circles under her eyes, like she hadn't slept all night. She had probably been up, trying to figure out how to regain control. She held a thick folder in her hands, gripping it so tightly that her knuckles were turning white. I leaned casually against the doorframe. "Good morning, Margaret. To what do I owe the pleasure?" Her eyes narrowed. "This isn't over." I let out a small laugh. "Oh, but it is. You saw the paperwork. You heard the votes. The HOA is under my control now, and the neighborhood has spoken." She shoved the folder toward me. "These are legal complaints. I've already contacted a lawyer. You can't just waltz in and change everything overnight. There are procedures, regulations." I held up a hand, cutting her off. "Margaret, I know the HOA rules better than you do. You should have read the fine print before you started throwing your weight around. The changes I made are completely legal. And as for your legal complaints, go ahead. Waste your money. But let me remind you, every time you enforced a rule without following proper process, you violate your own bylaws. If you want to take this to court, I guarantee it won't end well for you." Her face flushed red, but she wasn't ready to give up yet. "You think you're so clever, don't you? But you're not going to humiliate me like this." I tilted my head. "You painted my house pink without my consent, Margaret. You humiliated yourself." She let out a frustrated breath. "Fine. You want to play dirty? Two can play at that game." She spun on her heel and stomped away, leaving me standing there, watching her retreating form. I knew she meant those words as a threat, but I wasn't worried. Margaret was grasping at straws, and the more desperate she became, the more reckless her actions would be. And reckless people make mistakes. By the afternoon, I started getting messages from neighbors. Apparently, Margaret had gone door to door, trying to convince people that I was running some kind of illegal coup. She told them that my changes would destroy the neighborhood, that without strict rules, property values would plummet, and that I was turning the community into a circus. The problem was, nobody was buying it. The people she had fined over the years, the ones she had harassed over minor infractions, weren't exactly eager to support her. By evening, Margaret was getting desperate. That's when she made her biggest mistake yet. I was in my living room when I heard loud voices outside. Curious, I stepped out onto my porch and saw Margaret standing in the middle of the street, yelling at a group of neighbors who had gathered. She was waving her arms wildly, her voice shrill with frustration. "You're all being fooled," she shouted. "He's manipulating you. He doesn't care about this community. He's just trying to get revenge." Someone in the crowd laughed. "Revenge for what, Margaret? You literally painted his house without permission." Margaret's face twisted. "It was for the good of the neighborhood." Another voice called out. "And now we're deciding what's good for the neighborhood. And we say no more Margaret rules." The crowd chuckled, and I could see the realization sinking in for Margaret. She was losing. For years, she had held power over everyone, but now she had no control. She was used to being feared, to being obeyed, and now she was just a joke. Her eyes locked onto mine, filled with hatred. "This isn't over," she spat. I gave her a slow, easy smile. "I think it is." With that, she stormed off once again, but this time, there was no fight left in her. She had thrown everything she had at me, and nothing had worked. She had lost the neighborhood, lost her power, and soon, she would lose the last shred of respect anyone had for her. Later that night, I sat back on my porch, watching the stars. My house was still pink, but somehow, it didn't bother me as much anymore. Because at the end of the day, this wasn't just about the color. It was about standing up to a bully and winning. As I sipped my drink, I got another text from a neighbor. It was a mock-up of Margaret's house, photoshopped in a dozen different ridiculous colors: lime green, bright yellow, even rainbow stripes. The caption simply read, "Voting starts tomorrow." I laughed to myself. This was only the beginning. The next morning, the neighborhood was buzzing with energy. It was as if an invisible weight had been lifted off everyone's shoulders. For years, Margaret had ruled with an iron fist, handing out fines and barking orders like she was the queen of the world. But now, with her authority stripped away, people were finally starting to enjoy their homes again. Driveways that had been empty for fear of violating some obscure HOA rule were now filled with bikes, lawn chairs, and decorations that had once been deemed unacceptable. The best part was that the first official community vote was scheduled for that evening, and the excitement was palpable. People were already throwing around wild ideas for Margaret's house color. Someone suggested highlighter yellow, another proposed bright orange, and one particularly enthusiastic neighbor suggested covering the entire house in glitter paint. It was hilarious to see how eager everyone was to get a little payback, and honestly, Margaret had brought it all upon herself. I decided to take a walk through the neighborhood, enjoying the fresh air and the new sense of freedom. As I passed by houses, people waved at me, something that rarely happened before. A few even stopped me to chat, thanking me for finally standing up to Margaret. It was funny how just one person taking action could shift an entire community's mindset. The fear that she had instilled in people was gone, replaced with laughter and a shared sense of victory. It was the kind of thing that made all of this worth it. Of course, Margaret wasn't taking any of it well. By midday, she had locked herself inside her house, refusing to acknowledge the outside world. I saw her peek through her curtains more than once, her face twisted in anger as she watched people walking by, happy and relaxed for the first time in years. She was losing her grip on everything, and she knew it. Then, in true Margaret fashion, she tried one last desperate move. It started with a phone call. One of my neighbors, an old man named Frank, stopped by my house looking both amused and concerned. He had just received a call from Margaret, who was frantically trying to convince him that the new HOA rules were illegal. She was grasping at straws, telling him that if we let things continue like this, the neighborhood would fall apart. According to her, property values would plummet, crime would skyrocket, and soon we would be living in absolute chaos. Frank had laughed in her ear before hanging up, but the fact that she was still trying meant she wasn't ready to accept defeat just yet. I wasn't worried, though. The community was united now, and Margaret was outnumbered. There was nothing she could do to change what was coming. That evening, the entire neighborhood gathered in front of the clubhouse, eager for the results of the first official vote. People were chatting excitedly, exchanging jokes about what color would be the most ridiculous for Margaret's house. There was a sense of camaraderie that hadn't existed before, a feeling that we were all in this together. And that was something Margaret could never take away from us. When I stepped forward to announce the results, the crowd fell silent, waiting in anticipation. I unfolded the paper and read the winning choice aloud. Rainbow stripes. The cheers that erupted were deafening. People clapped, laughed, and even a few high-fived each other. It was the ultimate poetic justice. Margaret, who had spent years forcing everyone to conform to her dull, beige world, would now be living in the most colorful house on the block. I could only imagine her reaction when she found out. Sure enough, the moment the paint crew arrived the next morning, Margaret lost what little sanity she had left. I was sipping my coffee on the porch when I heard the unmistakable screech of her voice from down the street. "You can't do this. This is harassment." The painters, unfazed by her tantrum, continued their work methodically, coating her once pristine beige house in bright, dazzling stripes of red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and purple. It was beautiful. I walked over casually, hands in my pockets, and as Margaret flailed her arms at the workers who ignored her entirely, I said with a grin, "Morning, Margaret." She whipped around, eyes blazing with fury. "You did this. This is illegal. You're violating." I held up my phone, showing her the results of the community vote. "Not illegal. You made the rule, Margaret. The community just followed it." Her face turned a deep shade of red. "This is vandalism. I'll sue every single one of you." One of the painters chuckled. "Not vandalism. This is an official HOA project." Margaret let out a strangled noise somewhere between a growl and a scream. She was on the verge of completely losing it. I tilted my head. "If you want to paint your house back, all you have to do is file a request with the HOA. You remember how long that process takes, right?" Her hands balled into fists, her entire body shaking with rage. She was trapped in her own ridiculous system, and there was nothing she could do about it. The crowd that had gathered around us was openly laughing now, some even taking pictures. Margaret had spent years humiliating others, and now she was finally on the receiving end of it. I watched as the last strokes of paint were applied, completing the masterpiece. Margaret's house now looked like something out of a candy commerciale VY brand explosion of colors that made it impossible to ignore. Defeated, she stomped back inside and slammed the door so hard that I was surprised the windows didn't shatter. The neighborhood erupted into cheers once again, people already making plans to take photos and share them online. As I stood there, watching the celebration unfold, I realized something. This wasn't just about Margaret anymore. This was about taking back control, about people standing up for themselves and refusing to be bullied. Margaret had ruled through fear, but fear only worked if people let it. Now, she had no power left, and I had never felt more satisfied in my life. Margaret didn't come out of her house for the rest of the day. After watching her home get transformed into a rainbow-striped masterpiece, she had stormed inside, slamming the door so hard that the VY Brattines could probably be felt 3 houses down. The neighborhood was still buzzing with excitement, with people taking pictures of the new and improved Margaret house. Some of the neighbors had even set up lawn chairs on their driveways, enjoying the spectacle with a drink in hand. It was a celebration of Freedoma final VY Tory over the reign of HOA tyranny that Margaret had imposed for so long. But despite all the laughter and amusement, I knew this wasn't quite over. Margaret might have lost, but I doubted she would accept her defeat that easily. The next morning, I woke up feeling unusually refreshed. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't worried about waking up to some ridiculous new HOA rule or a notice taped to my door with an absurd fine attached to it. The house still looked ridiculous in its neon pink glow, but somehow, it didn't bother me as much anymore. It had become a symbol of VY Tory, a reminder of the absurdity of it all. As I stepped outside, coffee in hand, I noticed something odd. AMOVYing truck was parked outside Margaret's house. I walked to the edge of my driveway, watching as a couple of movers began loading boxes into the back of the truck. For a moment, I thought maybe she was bluffing, trying to stage some dramatic act to gain sympathy. But then I saw her. Margaret stood near her porch, arms crossed, her face a mixture of anger and pure exhaustion. She was really doing it. She was Leah VYing. A few neighbors had gathered nearby, watching with curiosity, whispering among themselves. Some of them were skeptical, wondering if she was actually MOVYing or just trying to make a scene. Others looked relieved, as if they had finally been freed from a dictator who had controlled their lives for years. I took a slow sip of my coffee, waiting for Margaret to notice me. It didn't take long. She turned her head, locking eyes with me, and for the first time since this entire ordeal began, she didn't have a single snarky comment to throw my way. There was no smug smile, no clipboard clutched in her hands, just silence. I took a few steps forward, stopping near the sidewalk. "So, you're really Leah VYing?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. Margaret let out a breath, shaking her head. "I don't have a choice," she said bitterly. "Nobody wants to buy a house that changes color every month. I tried listing it, and every offer I got was way below what I paid for it." I nodded, pretending to be sympathetic. "That's rough. I guess enforcing all those unnecessary HOA rules didn't exactly help with property values, huh?" Her jaw tightened. "You think you're funny, don't you?" I shrugged. "I think I'm finally able to enjoy my own home without worrying about someone dictating what color my fence has to be. So yeah, I'd say that's pretty funny." She exhaled sharply, clearly biting back whatever insult she wanted to throw at me. Instead, she looked over at the movers, watching them carry out more of her things. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, something I hadn't seen before. Regret, maybe. Not because she cared about the neighborhood, but because she had lost. Margaret wasn't the type to reflect on her mistakes. She was the type to lash out when things didn't go her way. But now, she didn't have a fight left in her. After a moment, she turned back to me. "I spent years building this HOA into something respectable," she said, her voice slow. "And you ruined it in one night." I raised an eyebrow. "Respectable? Margaret, you fined people for HOA welcome mats that didn't match their doors. You made a family replace their entire driveway because it had too many VY Cybele cracks. You tried to control every single aspect of people's lives. That's not respectable. That's power-hungry." Her lips pressed into a thin line, but she didn't argue. Maybe she knew there was nothing she could say that would change anything now. The sound of a car pulling up caught both of our attention. A man stepped out, dressed in a suit, holding a folder in his hands. Margaret let out an exasperated sigh. Great. Another lowball offer, she muttered. The man walked straight up to her, clearing his throat. Mrs. Hargrove, he asked. Margaret crossed her arms. Yeah, that's me. What do you want? He flipped open the folder, scanning through a few documents. I represent an investment company that's interested in purchasing properties in this area. We've reviewed your listing and would like to make a full-price cash offer. Margaret blinked. For a moment, it looked like she didn't even believe what she was hearing. Wait, full price? The man nodded. Yes. The only condition is that you accept immediately, as the deal is time-sensitive. Margaret hesitated for only a second before she nodded. Fine. Whatever. I just want to get out of here. The man handed her the papers, and she signed them without a second thought. I watched the whole exchange with mild curiosity. Something about it felt a little too convenient, but I wasn't about to say anything. As soon as the deal was done, Margaret turned to me one last time. Enjoy your circus, she said. This neighborhood is going to fall apart without real leadership. I smiled. I think we'll be just fine. She didn't say anything else. She just turned around, walked up to her house, and disappeared inside. An hour later, the moving truck pulled away, taking Margaret with it. As soon as she was gone, the entire neighborhood seemed to exhale at once. People stepped outside, exchanging grins, relief dent on their faces. Someone even popped open a bottle of champagne, toasting to the end of the Margaret era. I leaned against my porch railing, watching the celebration unfold. For the first time in a long time, the neighborhood felt alive. No more nitpicking. No more unreasonable fines. People were free to enjoy their homes again, and that was something worth celebrating. Later that night, as I sat back in my chair, looking up at the stars, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I frowned, opening it up. It was a simple text. You won this round. But don't think I've forgotten. I'll be back. I let out a small chuckle, shaking my head. Classic Margaret. I typed out a response, looking forward to it. And with that, I put my phone away, leaned back, and enjoyed the peace that had finally settled over the neighborhood. For now, at least. If you were the one in this story, how would you react? Would you stand up and fight back, or accept the unreasonable pressure and control from the HOA? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video with more people. Your small action gives us the motivation to keep bringing you more intense and engaging stories. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.